Okay, the meeting is now being recorded. Welcome, and I will let Sean go. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
setting
Good
this
night.
up. Have a great night. Okay, welcome everyone. I just want to be aware we have the Collins Center, Anthony and Patricia with us.
Pat.
Thank you both for coming and attending. We normally do have a quorum, however, Raphael and Marcus are absent. They have been sent the link and a reminder. I just did that, and we will let Anthony and Patricia from the Collins Center present and be able to ask them questions. However, unless one of either Marcus or Raphael joins, we won't be able to continue with the rest of the agenda or deliberate with the Collins Center or among ourselves, as that's a violation of open meeting law, unless we are able to get a quorum. And if I see anyone in the audience, I will let them in. The public Zoom link has also been corrected so that the Charter Review Committee meeting public Zoom link goes to the Charter Review Committee meeting, and the Community Resources Committee of the Town Council Zoom link goes to the Community Resources Committee for the public. So that was just corrected. I'm going to check if we have any members of the public here.
One.
Looks like
We have
one. I appreciate you joining us. And we will kick it off. Just a reminder, no deliberation unless we get a quorum with Anthony, with, Marcus or Raphael. Anthony or Patricia, you want to start us off?
I'm sharing my screen. Please, we have a brief slideshow presentation for you.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so I might sound a little weird, but Patricia will jump in whenever and make me sound good. So
thank you.
Thank you for joining us with a cold.
Oh, no problem. You're welcome. And also, we're from home, so I feel like there are very limited excuses to not being able to make something in today's world.
Well, the evening time could be hard, but
so I'll just do a quick introduction for myself and Pat in the Collins Center. I know that a number of members of the committee are familiar with the Collins Center, but I'll just give a sort of a brief overview of us. But my name is Anthony Wilson. I'm currently leading the charter and organizational structure for the Collins Center. Prior to that, I was a city clerk in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as well as a city clerk in Springfield and a lawyer in the Springfield Law Department for several years. And I'll just quickly turn it over to Pat for her introduction.
Hi, I'm Pat Lloyd. I'm with the Collins Center. I've been with the Collins Center for more than 3 years now. In my prior life, I was a labor and employment attorney, as well as managing editor for a publisher for Cities in Town legal publications. I also was on my own local town meeting for 15 years and served on a number of committees. So I have some experience in many angles of this. And we're so happy to be here and talking to you today and look forward to hearing more about.
We still don't have a quorum.
Okay.
Thank you both. I appreciate it. And thank you for putting up with us getting started there. Meg, I just want to let you know you're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. And
I walked out.
I'll just remind folks if they have questions for the Collins Center, no deliberation, but you can raise hand and I will call on you to ask questions. Just raise your hand.
And I just want to let everyone know, as we go through this, feel free to interrupt us and ask us some questions. This presentation is going to be a brief overview of, again, the Collins Center and a little bit about the charter review process and some of the things we've seen other communities do as they sort of embark on this process. So quick background, Collins Center created in 2008 by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to provide technical assistance to cities and towns and other public agencies across the state. We provide services in a number of areas, including human resources, finance, operations, IT, and obviously charter and organizational structure. The town of Amherst has been a recipient of our services in the past. We assisted with the previous charter creation project, but we also assisted with projects with communities across the state. I've listed a few at the bottom of this slide, but I like to tell people that we really go anywhere in the state. We're on Nantucket now, We just finished a project in Ludlow. So really either end of the state, and we are in communities of all different sizes and shapes. So communities with mayors, communities with managers, town meetings, really any structure you can think of, we probably worked in. So let me turn over to you, Pat, for a quick overview of the charter basics.
Thank you. So when we look at charters, the charter review process is going to look a little different than creating your process as a whole. Some of we've included here, these are the sections of your charter. And we can talk about what modern charters do and the changes that are made and some things you might want to look at. Modern charters tend to be laid out in a certain organizational pattern. And Amherst Charter very much falls under these patterns. First, incorporation and definitions, some background information. There'll be a discussion of the legislative branch, the executive branch, and other elected offices are always listed in the charter. It's really intended to be a instruction manual for the city or town to help people find what they need all in one place. More and more, there has been an emphasis on putting financial policies and procedures into charters. There is also a process by which the administrative structure of the town is established and laid out exactly how do you change departments? How do you change how the town is structured? There will be a section on elections, as well as a section on resident participation. I know that Amherst has some interesting elements of its own charter with respect to resident participation. And as we go along, we'd really like to hear from you and how these things have been working out for you. General provisions is another section, which is very, basic legalese, boilerplate, telling you things like when, how often are you going to look at this charter? And finally, the transition provision helps you determine how you're going to make the charter changes, how they're going to go into effect, and over what period of time. So the next is a little bit about your charter changes. Some of your charter changes, if they're relatively minor, don't require to be passed by special act, but any significant or substantial changes will require a special act. Why do we do this? It allows for a diversion from state law. So if you've opted into a state law, or if you want to do something a little different from the basic structure, you have the flexibility under a special act to ask for exactly what your community needs. We talk about stability. So in your case, you have a council, but a special act amendment is going to require approval at council, and then go to the legislature. And then after the legislature approves it, and in many cases, it's then ratified by the voters before being put into place. As we talked about before, transparency is really essential in this process. And while the charter is a single resource where you can pull together somewhat the instruction manual for the town, going through a special act and having these changes incorporated into your charter allows for one place where your residents can find exactly what they need and understand how the town is run.
So I'll go a little bit over the charter review process, and I just want to, before I get into these next slides, I want to sort of pick up a little bit on something Pat discussed, which was certain charter changes will require a special act versus just an act of the town. That can be a very sort of nuanced discussion. Generally speaking, you can think of any time that you're changing elected positions, the composition, or making an elected position unappointed, an appointed position, that may trigger the special act process. And again, it varies. It's not going to be fruitful to have the full discussion on that today, but just know that if you're making certain major changes specifically around elections, those are ones where you need to go to the legislature.
Could you say those three things again? Elections?
I think I
Composition?
said the composition. So, for example, you have a town council. So if you were to change
Right.
the size of the town council,
Right.
change the terms, things
Right.
of that nature, generally those are going to be the types of things that you
Yeah,
need.
and then the timing of elections. And what was the third one?
The timing, the number of the size of
Yeah.
the council body, the terms, the
Uh-huh.
terms of office, things of that nature.
Okay, got it.
Now there could be that's not an exhaustive list. That's just an example of sort of
Right.
the types of things that require a special act. Julian.
Hi, thank you. I just want to interrupt for 1 second. It looks like Marcus has joined us, which means we do officially have a quorum. Marcus, can you hear us and be heard?
Yes, when I can figure my mute button. Sorry.
Excellent,
Problems
thank
obviously.
you. So we officially have a quorum of the committee.
Great.
Everyone else can be heard and everything. And I'll let you finish up your presentation. We'll ask questions, then we can deliberate, and then I'll go back through points 1, 2, and 3 on the agenda and move us to point 5, just so folks know how that's working. And to the public, we still have 1 participant, but welcome to our official meeting. We are now can vote and deliberate and all that, so you're aware, because we have a quorum, just barely. And my one question for Anthony was just, does that include changing the form of government? Would that require a special act, or will that require a charter commission as well?
If you change from a form of government, that you could do it through a special act, and
Okay.
yeah, that would, I'm sorry, it would require a special act, correct?
Thank you.
And just
Okay.
when you said, you mentioned a charter commission is a different process altogether. And that is a resident-led process, which would involve an elected charter commission. That's an alternative path to changing the form of government. But the path that you're on right now is an appointed committee rather than an elected commission.
Excellent. Thank you.
And so this next slide is just an excerpt from your existing charter. So this is a good starting point, a sort of this committee, as I understand it, was formed pursuant to this periodic review. So this is your first review under the charter. Your regular review is going to be every 10 years, but this is your first, I think, 5-year review. So the next reviews will happen sort of over a longer period of time. And I just highlighted some of the sort of interesting provisions, but I think we were sort of on at 6, which I think the committee sort of touched on. The committee was technically formed in 2024, I think in the summer, June abouts. And you've got under the charter, in theory, about 1 year to make your recommendations for proposed changes to the existing charter. It does say, I didn't highlight this, but unless an extension is authorized by vote of the town council. So there's the ability to get extensions if necessary. And Andy, I see your hand up.
Go ahead, Andy. You're
Andy,
muted.
you're muted.
You're muted.
My understanding is that we will need to request an extension, so you don't need to worry about us trying to finish up by April.
But also, I can't get my thing to, okay, there.
Yep, Meg, go ahead.
I
There.
can't, I'm on my iPad and I'm not used to using it. I don't know if you can even see me.
If you
We
can't use it for whatever reason, you can.
No,
also raise
yeah,
your
okay,
hand.
we understand that the report isn't necessarily the final report, it's just a report. An update.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what we,
So we're not necessarily legal counsel for the community, even though both myself and Pat are lawyers, but it says recommendations in a report to the town council. It's talking about sort of in that time frame. So
yeah, well, our recommendation might be to give us more time.
I have there's 3 reports, and one is preliminary, one is intermediary, and one is final. And we will be discussing the timing of at least the final report later on in the agenda. So I'll ask to hold discussion about that until that point. Go ahead, Anthony.
I see Bernie has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Bernie, go right ahead.
Yeah, real quick, Anthony, Pat, did you have an opportunity to look at the charge we were given by the commission? By the council?
I'm not sure if I may have seen the charge. I don't remember.
All right, because
So,
I think what we want to focus on is really the operation of the charter, the effectiveness of the charter. And I think when we get around to actually working on an agreement with the Collins Center, and I'm going to advocate for that, I've been advocating for that, we can get into some more specifics about the number of reports we have to generate and the like. But I think the thing for us is to be willing to get into the weeds as to how the charter is operating and where the charter can be improved. And if those improvements can happen by vote of the council, or do we need to use the referendum process to get them approved? And then beyond that, if there's any major changes, because we're not a charter commission, we're a charter review, we'd have to, that'll be a separate debate and section of the report. So just
Yeah.
with that in mind, please continue.
No, and Bernie, that was actually a great segue to the next slide, which is how should the committee go about the process of making the determinations that you were talking about? What in the charter should we be looking at? What should be changed? And so the communities that we've seen engage in this process, particularly under the more modern forms of charters, how do they do that? And so I would say maybe recommendation is too strong of a word, but where we've seen it work really well is communities that start as sort of a blank slate and say, okay, we are charged with, you're not necessarily crafting a whole new charter, you're looking at the charter that was recently adopted and saying what works and doesn't work and how should we start that. And that's by gathering input and sort of air quotes here, public input, in the sense that you want to methodically go through the various stakeholders that are impacted by the new charter, which is, in your case, you've got a sort of brand new or relatively newly created legislative entity called the town council. So you probably want to hear from some of the members. You want to hear from the boards or commissions that some may have been created by the charter and some may be impacted in their operation under the new charter. You want to have some interviews or meetings with some of the elected and appointed officials, as Pat showed in the that sort of summary of the articles of your existing charter, the other elected officials. And I don't know specifically who's in there, but to the extent you have some, that could be meeting with members of the school committee or other elected officials. And while it's last here on my list, it's certainly not last. It shouldn't be last in your thinking, but also having open meetings to hear from the public. In terms of now the public is interesting because the charter can be somewhat esoteric and sort of thing that people are not just that aware about sort of the underlying plumbing of their government. But with some guidelines, you can definitely get some interesting feedback from the public. Maybe they don't feel like they're hearing enough from their town council. Maybe they are not aware of who to speak to on different issues. And that could be an area for you to point to in terms of things to look at. And then obviously you're sorting that input about the charter, and then you're reviewing each article. Now, as we get to this third area here, the review of each article, I generally recommend to these committees to look back at the report, and I'm not sure if you've already done this, but to look back at the previous report created by the charter committee that created your current charter, because I'm sure that that the reports generally have some reasoning around why the committee went in one direction versus another, and perhaps some things that they would have liked to have looked at to explore, but didn't for one reason or another. And not to call anyone out, but I think you have some members from the prior charter committee on your committee who can maybe remember some of those things.
They're both still unindicted, so it's okay.
Yeah, we paid off some people.
Okay.
Just
And
kidding.
then sort of after you've done some of that digging, each one of you is bring your own life experience and your own thoughts and views to this. So and it doesn't have to be sort of in this chronological order that I'm laying out, but even as you're sorting through, so it is appropriate for you to say, I actually really want to look at this article or that article for whatever reason, to sort of mix that in. And it's funny that you talked about sort of a number of different documents. So do we sort of recommend you're going to have some preliminary findings, right? Not necessarily that you've necessarily written anything down or proposed any changes, but you might say, we've seen these areas of concern, or we've seen that this is working or not working well. And you want to hear from the public again and from the stakeholders, you know, yes, we agree this is something that should be looked at. And here's our recommendation for you to look in terms of solutions. And then you take all of that into the drafting process, into the, the solution making, which really should happen, I say, in the sort of the second half, second third of this whole process. I'm sorry, second half or the final third of the whole process.
Great.
I'm going to move on from this slide. I don't know if there's any questions, because I think we're going to.
So I have a
Yeah, sure.
question.
Go
You
ahead.
said it's good to, maybe misunderstood, to share what we each think could be an improvement. And I'm not sure how to do that because our focus has been, to our credit, almost entirely about listening to other people and listening and being creative and energetic and rigorous about listening to the public and engaging people whose voices aren't usually heard. And so
Yep.
I don't see this as a role where one would be an advocate for something.
Well, I don't necessarily mean advocacy. Well, there's some advocacy, but and excuse me,
I'm so sorry that you have to
no,
do this when
no,
you're
no,
not well.
no.
You should be in bed.
I'm getting no,
Yes, feel
I'm much
better.
better than I was. But what I would say is, to
Important
your
and your
question,
family should be bringing you tea.
they have. I have a lot of stuff around me. But what I would say is, after you've heard from the public, and you've sort of done that sorting, and you guys have looked as a group of all the information and recommendations that you've received, you'll have learned a lot about your charter, and you will have learned a lot about your community at that point. And there may be things that, for example, let's say you do your sorting, and most concerns are in, I'm just making it a bucket A, and you don't see the need to go into bucket B. But someone may have someone on the committee may really be interested in making a tweak for bucket B. I'm thinking at that point, once you've gathered the information, once you've done your sorting, a lot of this is you guys are working as a committee. That means hearing from one another, listening. And so at that point, it's good to have that discussion about why, why we're going to go into the solution creating about one thing or another. So that's what I mean in terms of considering other articles as necessary from the because there's probably going to be some things where it's like, yes, we know we need to work on this, but someone may be interested in something else that doesn't automatically go in that bucket, and there should really be a robust discussion on why we do or don't. Andy, I see your hand.
When we talked on the phone, we talked a little bit about the nuances, and I think you mentioned it's kind of a nuanced process to get input from the public on something as technical as a town charter or a city charter. And one of the things that struck me in that conversation was, and it made sense to me, was that when we're talking with the public, maybe when we're talking with counselors or when we're talking with town manager or elected officials or whatever, we could get to the point where we're saying, are there particular aspects of the charter that you think are or aren't working? But more generally, I think what you were saying was focus more on general input on what is working and what's not working, where are the pain points, in dealing with the government now, or how decisions are made or whatever, and not get too technical about, well, what do you think about, Article 6 or whatever. So is that a fair, mindset to have?
Yes, that's a very correct. I don't know if I said this during our meeting, but I like to say, your residents are in some ways clients or recipients of service. So their feedback will be better. And sort of, I experienced, this service. I wanted to speak at a meeting, and sort of you put in the bucket of not the technical sort of requirements of, A has to happen before B, but at the end result, were you feeling in terms of the result? And then there's definitely a sort of some thought and some nuance that goes into, the member of the public experienced something. How do I connect that to a process in the charter, in the charter? And that's really going to be, that kind of falls on the committee. But as you structure this, and I'm going to go back a slide, I think it does make sense to sort of say, to talk to some of the internal folks first, not to say that they're more important from the public, but that can start to allow you to sort of have some bins of areas that things can go into, and then you can structure your formal public input meeting around those bins to say, we've heard a lot about, the council meeting or decisions made by the town manager in that decision-making process, and do people feel included or not? And that sort of can help to shape that discussion so that you get more usable feedback from the public.
And can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
I think you also mentioned that you have in terms of figuring out what questions to ask, that you guys have a resource bank of questions that have been tested in the past. Is that something we can access?
I wouldn't necessarily say tested, but we have a bank of questions that have been used in the past in other charter reviews, and we can give them to you with some editorializing about how well they did or didn't work.
Hmm.
All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Pat to talk about some of the trends in municipal government. Yours is relatively new, but things are evolving even in the 5 years since your adoption.
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that we're really looking forward to hearing what you've done, and what issues have already come up. So these are just some ideas that some other charter committees are working with to give you, as Anthony says, some bins to put your ideas into. There seems to be, in the average, a reduction in the number of elected officials and boards, combined with a centralization of management. As the professionalism of the town staff rises, we're seeing that some elected officials are being converted to appointed officials. Perhaps some boards are downsizing. Sometimes there's not the volunteer pool that would support large boards. So that's one area that you may want to take a look at, whether things are working, how things are working for you, whether you're getting.
Yep, sorry. I'm sorry. I've got to figure out how to raise my hand.
Oh, that's fine. Meg, before you say that, I was just because I saw you having your phone, we're gonna send you the slides, so you don't have to try to take pictures.
Okay,
of
I'm
it.
taking
You're gonna get all the
pictures, yeah.
slides.
Is this a summary of general cities that you work with, or Amherst?
This is general.
General.
These are
Okay.
general trends in some charter, and it doesn't mean that these things have changed, or that it just means that these are the issues that people are looking at in other cities and towns.
Got it. Very
Um,
helpful.
It's each city or town is so unique that you really have to look at what the culture and the political structure of your city, of your place is,
Yeah.
and what's working for you and what's not. As I mentioned before, there seems to be more of an emphasis on the budget process, making sure there's a lot of public input along the way in the budget process, and heightening transparency. And sometimes that comes out in charter changes around the budgeting and the financial areas. Sometimes there's a requirement to develop and maintain a long-term capital plan or a long-term financial report. That's being included in some.
Yeah.
Try to highlight the powers of the towns, as it says, as state home rule provides. In other words, are there things in your city or town that you want to do differently than perhaps is the general norm among general council manager towns? Is there something that you want to adapt specifically for the town of Amherst?
Got it.
There's acknowledgement and adaptation to emerging technology. Maybe you want to change you can't change the laws around it, but there may be places where you want to change how is there notice for meetings? What does it mean to provide notice for different either meetings or for other requirements under your charter? There is some attempt to standardize procedures for conduct and operation of local government administration. And this can be done both through like a handbook or bylaws, but there are also some areas in the charter where they've chosen to streamline certain procedures for boards and committees. For example, you know, when minutes have to be posted, things like that. In general, there's a removal of gender references. I think your charter is pretty up to date on this, and so it probably doesn't apply to you, but we always like to keep that in mind. So for example, there are a lot of places that have evolved from being Board of Selectmen to Select Board or to another name for their Select Board. Okay, next slide, please, Anthony.
Bernie, go ahead.
Yeah,
Oh,
just
sorry.
quickly, I was part of a committee that reviewed the town's bylaws and mapped them from the town form to the city form, recommended changes to the council where we could, and we were pretty rigorous about eliminating gender references and making sure that we had our language was equitable and how and our phrasing was proper, so and polite, which is what I think we need to watch out for. So yeah, that's the gender references piece. I think the town's done a good job of addressing that.
Wonderful, thank you. Some other issues that we're seeing, there's been a lot of discussion about, and this may actually apply to Amherst because of your large number of students and other people who are living and working in Amherst, but there's been a discussion about removing some residency and voter requirements for certain offices and volunteers. For example, there's some movements to allow non-voters to be a part of committees that, you know, some cities and towns require you to be a registered voter in order to serve on, you know, the various committees throughout town. So there's been some movement in trying to incorporate residents who are not voters. I know Amherst already has moved in that direction, but you can talk about how that's working for you. Some charters have started putting in mechanisms for assuring that charters are enforced. And it's language, for example, what's the process? Where do you go if you think that the charter hasn't been followed? And so we have looked at different ways of managing that. Who's in charge of making sure the charter is being followed? There has been a trend to coordinating emergency management activities and resources that, you know, may not rise to the level of a charter issue, but it's certainly an area where there's more talk about how do we share services. Another is an emphasis on how residents participate and stay informed in town policies, functions, activities, and community engagement. We've seen some charters look at putting in language, giving, for example, the town manager or someone else responsibility for making sure that for reaching out and making sure people are engaged, that the processes are transparent. We've seen a lot more concern about that. Adoption of procedures for resident initiatives, referenda, and recall. You have a very robust resident participation section already in your charter. But you may really want to look at, is it working for you? Are people able to work through this? But you have you actually have one of the most robust and inclusive and allowing people to ways to participate in government. So it's a good area for review. So we can definitely help you along the way and talk about what other cities and towns are doing.
I had one question, if you
sure.
don't mind, which is just have you seen, like, I know I read in the news and read into it a bit, how a few years ago the city of Holyoke had a member of who worked for the schools, was like some sort of educator in the schools, run for city council, and how that was an issue with the town's or with that city's charter. And I know we have a similar provision, not worded exactly the same. Have you seen that addressed in a lot of cities and towns, or was that more of a specific issue?
Are you referring to specifically being a town employee and running for office at the same?
Yeah, exactly. Like I was
That is
wondering.
absolutely something that's addressed in charters. When that is allowed, when it's not allowed, whether it creates a conflict, and it's often going to vary depending on what position is being held. There is obviously the state conflict of interest law sets the standard, the minimum standards for what can be done. Charters often go above and beyond those standards and create provisions to avoid the appearance of a conflict. But there's definitely room for discussion in that area, and it's put into the charters exactly what is permitted and what is not.
Thank you so much.
I gotta raise I'm on my iPad. I can't figure
Go
out how
ahead,
to
Meg.
raise my hand.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
somewhere I can. You've talked a lot in a very helpful way about amending the charter. What about things that are practice that are just the way it's done, like how we use Zoom and which information is private and which isn't? It's not really a charter matter, but it's how leaders haven't decided to implement practice.
So that's another sort of a good question. So in this sort of next step slide, one of the things we do talk about with communities is I'm gonna point you to that third bullet here, sort of or second and third bullet, which is sort of not all issues can be resolved by the charter, and then sort of we recommend that the charter focus on who makes decisions, whether those decision makers should be appointed or elected, and then the decision making process, which is sort of how much is it made publicly and how many meetings and things, there's a number of things that sort of go into the decision making
Right.
process. Sort of in that, in sort of so that sort of creates sort of a boundary around sort of what you should be doing. But in the process of you learning about your government and how it's worked in these past 5 years, there's going to be a number of things that you are going to find, or maybe that you've already sort of noticed that exactly what you're saying, Meg, about sort of like just the practice. Maybe things have been held over from the transition from the town meeting to the town council that either should or that people think aren't working, but they weren't in the charter. We recommend those types of issues to be raised in the committee report to say, town manager or town council, town manager, maybe you should we've noticed this in our charter review, and we'd recommend you explore it for maybe a policy. Or
Right.
Town council, we've noticed this, and maybe you should convene another committee, or you yourself should look at drafting some sort of bylaw to address this issue. And you can sort of
Right.
lay that out in as much specificity as you deem appropriate. I would sort of put some brackets around it to say, you don't want to, you kind of have a lot on your plate already in terms of just reviewing the charter. So just be careful about going down rabbit holes that could sort of take you too far away from your standard focus. So that's just
I would say that the people who come up to me, so on the street, as they say, or email me, or the things they are unhappy about are practice. They're not necessarily in the charter, like not being able to see who the participants are in a meeting because of something about Zoom when other towns show them. It's or you can be anonymous if you want, but that is this transparency stuff that people seem to be concerned about that aren't really related to the charter at all.
I'll just chime in. That's even an issue that I've wrestled with as chair, because I originally wanted to name the participants, and then Athena told me not to, but there isn't anything in the charter that prohibits it. So it really is sort of just a matter of what different people deem as reasonable.
And I would say, oh, sorry.
Whether applicants for a position are public information. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues around transparency that have come up to the people who talk to me, like, you know, want to have coffee, and that's what they talk about.
And some of that may be able to be addressed in the chart. Again, we don't have all the specifics, so I don't want to go sort of too far afield. But you know, we're using Zoom and these sort of telephonic ways of communication more and more. It's part of sort of the fundamentally way that we interact with government, the way that government interacts, you know, goes about its business. And so, you know, that's exactly what sort of that's one of the things that Pat sort of hinted on, which is as technology evolves and as our the way we interact with technology changes, maybe our charter should be modified to incorporate some of that. Now you got to be careful. You know, there's open meeting law. There's a lot of things, but again, as you explore these topics, you may be able to find that there's something that you can address in the charter. And again, since that you can't, that's a good place to just have the reporting, because some of these things, just like the legislature, it's been on their agenda for the past 2 years. How do we pass an act that makes virtual meetings or hybrid meetings permanent? They could be a whole study committee in and of themselves.
Yeah,
So,
but
you know,
before Zoom, everyone who came to a public meeting, difficult as that was to get in your car and drive somewhere, you look around the room and you knew who was there. And so Zoom has enabled a variety of ways of reducing transparency.
You might not know their names though.
Right, I was going to
You
say,
might not
just
know their
because they're
names. That's
there
good
doesn't
point.
mean that you knew their name. And just because, you know, you don't have to recognize everybody in a room, they're just there. You had to speak up and say who you were to speak, but being in attendance didn't require you to identify yourself, and it should not require you to identify yourself.
Right. But you could take your name off Zoom. I'm not arguing. I mean, I'm just saying people have raised this. You can remove your.
Yeah,
It's
but
just
at the
it's
same
an
time,
issue.
at the same time, Julian should, you know, if we have public comment, we require someone to say who they are, where they live, right? Just the same way as we do in an in-person meeting. Whether you've got your name displayed or not is neither here nor there, right? So
Anyway,
it's
we
just
don't
the
need.
same
This
way.
is
Yeah.
clearly this is something to talk about. I was
That's
giving
correct.
I was
It is
giving it
sort
as
of-
an example. I was just giving an example, not to
I-
discuss it right now.
Yeah, I will just say that specific issue, although we could potentially add something in the charter or recommend adding something, is currently sort of at the chair's discretion. And if the committee wants to take a vote to advise me one way or the other on that, I would be happy to consider it. I've sort of gone back and forth. I've had meetings where I list off participants and where I don't. Bernie?
Yeah, I was going to say that we, one of the things that have been raised, and one of the concerns that have been raised to me is that we're all little talking heads, and how do we know that you're really you?
Right.
And in particular, what was referenced in particular was people who either had a photograph of themselves and they rather than appearing live on camera, or people who keep their video off.
Yeah.
We know that they're, you know, how we know that they're really there. We're not going to
Like
solve
this.
that.
There's
We're
one.
not
See,
going to solve that.
There I am.
I'm more concerned, I think, with looking at how we can recruit people in to committees,
Right.
recruit people to run for public office.
I agree.
Those are the kinds of things that, you know, there's a million different ways to communicate to the council, but how do you know that the council's actually received and reacted, will react to if they don't? Just because I write a counselor doesn't obligate.
I agree, Bernie.
Doesn't obligate the council to write me back, but I want to be able to know that the person got the message. So there's some stuff in here that we can look at, and I think we need to be careful to sort out tradition, sort of behavioral things that are that may be behavioral traits of a person, how a person behaves in a meeting, versus what how this charter is structured, how meetings are structured, and does that structure facilitate open discussion? Does that structure facilitate decision making? I'm really, a constant concern of mine is just the length of the meetings and how they work or don't work, and then to ask somebody to run for office to spend that amount of time is getting difficult. So I would like to be able to look at some of the behavioral aspects that the charter imposes, or behavioral requirements the charter imposes. So we can make that a little more efficient and make it easier to be heard for the public to be heard.
Oh,
Pat,
sorry.
sorry, Pat or Patricia, would you prefer Pat or Patricia? I should have asked earlier.
Pat is just fine. Pat is
Okay,
fine.
great. Thank you. I saw you had your hand up, so I wanted to let you go ahead.
I did, and I love this discussion, and it's great to hear. I wanted to add, there's one more, maybe half of a bullet. On occasion, when you find that you get to an issue that just would take too much time, and as Anthony says, your plate is full. You're going to have a lot to get done in the time that you have. But if there's an issue that really rises to the level of this is something we really need to talk about, often in the transition section of a charter, there will be a directive to form a study committee on a certain matter. So that would be a part of the charter that, within a certain amount of time after the charter changes are made, a study committee will be appointed for a certain matter. So, there are those issues that you can raise in the report, but there may be one or two issues that even rise to a higher level, saying this is not something we can deal with, but we really believe that this should be in the charter and involve the creation of a study committee.
Good idea.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I had a question about the transition section because, right now it's basically here's how you transition from town meeting to council. And so I was wondering if we even needed it anymore, or do we jettison what's in there now and we put transition to the next phase in the charter, or what do we do with that section?
Right.
Well, usually.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anthony.
Well, I was going to say usually the transition section it stays in what'll probably come out of a committee like this is legislative language for amendments to the to the existing charter, and so you wouldn't propose an amendment to delete it, or at least I haven't seen that happen very often. But as Pat said, you could add a provision to the transition section to say, I mean, for example, I'm just making this up. I'm not saying that the committee's going to do this, but assuming it were to change the structure of the town council, I think it's just a good example. Then you would put in a provision about how we transition to the new structure, whether it's the size, whether it's the terms, you'd have a transition. But as Pat mentioned, you could have something to say, we would like because usually the transition section is time limited. So you'd say starting within, a few months of the adoption of this charter, the town council will form a 9-person committee to look at issue X and present a proposal. So it's usually amended to. I haven't seen it fully deleted in most charter proposals. And Pat, I think you want to say something. Feel free to jump in.
I was going to say exactly what you just said, Anthony.
Excellent. Just one quick question before I call on Marcus. Is this our last slide, or what? How's the slideshow?
This is our last slide. I do just want to say one thing before the group gets into
Right ahead.
its discussion, which is very warm feelings towards Amherst. I talked to the group that worked on the last charter. We do really want to work. When I proposed this to the team, there are a lot of people really want to work with Amherst. Unfortunately, we have a lot on our. I think it was Bernie earlier who said there's a lot of dots on the map of the places that we worked in. It's really sort of filled out. So our team is a little stretched right now. So we wouldn't be able to start working with Amherst immediately. I think the soonest we could probably get to you is mid to late March to really start coming to meetings regularly. And I'm in the process. I've talked to Julian and I've talked to Andy.
Thank you.
So I've got the sort of the background to make a proposal. So hopefully we'll be sending one over in the next week or so to be forwarded up the chain to possibly be signed, but we wouldn't necessarily have a team to come over specifically until late March. I just wanted to put that to the committee.
No worries. I appreciate that, Anthony, and thank you, Anthony and Pat, for presenting to us. That was an excellent presentation, and I think actually even answered a few more long-ranging questions folks have asked. I will call on Marcus and then Andy.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just kind of curious when you said that nobody kind of deleted the transition section, because that's, to me, is just dead language, right? It's been and gone, and why are we kind of sticking around? I don't know if you've heard anything about town or cities' thoughts on why not to get rid of it. You know, nobody cares what happened 10, 15, 20 years ago at this point. We're trying to look forward, so reuse the section for something that's looking to go in the next phase of the charter, not the original phase.
Pat, I'd love if you have any feedback. I haven't heard too much robust discussion on it. I mean, the little bit that I have heard about the transition section is that some of the historical information is kind of useful in terms of how the transition was made, particularly in communities where you've changed form of government. But I haven't been a part of too much robust discussion about keeping or deleting it. Pat, I don't know if you've heard anything.
Because I would think that, you know, the original form, you know, there is a version of the original charter, and this is the new charter, so this version doesn't need the old stuff. Anyway, I think that's something Andy and I can talk about for ages.
Yeah, the only thing I would have to add is, as Anthony mentioned, there's an historical value to it for the town to understand. And what we're just talking about what we've seen. Sure, it's possible to get rid of that and put in new information. It's really going to depend on the nature and how many changes you would choose to make to the charter. If there's just a few changes, with a little bit of transition, maybe you wouldn't need to wipe it clean. But if you were going to do something major, you might need to wipe it clean and start over. It's really going to be a case-by-case basis. And we can take a look at that after the transition is always the last part that we write. We have to understand where everything is going before we lay out the transition section. So, you know, it may be when we're all through with this, we decide to delete some of it. We may like to leave it in. I have to say, as a researcher, I love when it's still there because it's not so easy to find old charters online. So having it there is really wonderful when you're trying to look and compare charters among the communities.
I just wanted to chime in for 1 minute before I let Andy and Bernie speak. And just remind us where we are on the agenda because the meeting got off to a little bit of a rocky start. Call to order, welcome announcements have been done. Approving the minutes of January 16th and January 30th. We do not have we have not been presented with either of those minutes from Athena, so we are not working to approve those at this point, so that's been tabled. I am wondering, I've sent folks an email out about this. Who is taking minutes for tonight?
I thought I was, and I
believe
have
that's correct.
the transcript running right now that I was just going to run through ChatGPT and.
Excellent. That's perfect. Thank you, Marcus. That works.
Good idea.
No, I don't quite know when it started, so we might miss a few. I don't.
That's
remember.
okay. I think if we missed a little bit of that presentation, that's
Right.
all right.
Yeah.
As long as we get the gist that
GTP does that. Wow.
Collins.
Yeah, you can throw that sort of stuff in and say make a summary of this transcript. And
Wow.
it'll put it in.
That's with Google as well on your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
And then lastly, before we get to too much deliberation, I just wanted to invite I know we have one member, Anita, from the public, who, if you want to make a comment, please step in, press the raise hand button on Zoom or *9 before we deliberate so that the committee can consider your comments if you have any. Excuse me. I don't see you raising your hand at all. So I will just remind us, we've done the Collins Center presentation. We're doing Collins Center Q&A and next steps right now, and then we'll move on to budget update. Unfortunately, Samantha, who works for the town social media, cannot be here tonight, but we may invite her to a future meeting. So then after this Collins Center Q&A, we will have the budget update and extension request. And then I believe Meg also has something to bring up in topics not anticipated. I will call on Andy, then Bernie, then Meg. That's the order I originally saw your hands. Thank you.
I guess I'm wondering, I think we're okay having meetings. I don't know. I mean, we could talk about what the proposal entails, whether how much we need to have you guys at our meetings, or versus more of a consulting relationship up front to say, hey, we're gonna be talking to elected officials. These are the questions we're thinking about asking. Can you look them over? Or we're preparing a survey for the public, or we have a timeline for outreach. You know, can you give us some feedback? I'm wondering if we could have sort of an initial relationship that was, you know, lighter on time for you guys, but would get us sort of the just-in-time feedback from you guys sooner rather than later, or getting access to the questions that people have asked in other, you know, charter review committees, things like that. So there may be things that, you know, we actually are thinking about outreach. We are thinking about doing interviews, and those things we can do without having you guys have to have a team coming to meetings or anything like that. But it would be great if we could get some feedback on the questions we're asking sooner rather than later, so that we don't just go running off and asking things that could be better with your input. So I don't know if you have the capacity to do that kind of, you know, brief, like we email you something, you look it over, you send it back to us and say, have you thought about this? I don't know if it could be structured in a way that it's consulting up front, and then maybe we have some more meeting support later on.
So I do sort of have that in my notes from our last conversation. So yes, I actually meant to sort of, to your question, I sort of meant to have a proposal to you before today, but we have had a lot of projects. So I'm hoping I do have it structured that way, sort of a smaller, more limited contract to sort of start with, which I'm hoping to get over to you next week. That doesn't have that many meetings actually built into it. So sort of, you know, it sort of structured as a more consultative contract with some meetings built in, sort of more spread out, but not as heavy. And just for anyone who may be concerned, we have had circumstances where if we've sort of expended the number of meetings for a contract to be amended or extended, things of that nature. So it doesn't sort of lock you necessarily into having that limited relationship, but knowing where we are and sort of in the conversation we have where you guys want us, that's the sort of first draft of what the proposal will look like.
Thank you, Bernie.
Yeah, well, Anthony, I'm glad to hear you say that, because my thoughts were running along the same lines as Andy. We did map out a process for interviewing town officials, electeds, department heads. We have some sample questions. We get some of that screened and looked at, so we could begin that process of what really the first bullet point in your chart of who do you talk to. And that's a critical thing, that, you know, we get we get those people interviewed and get that baseline so we can get up to speed. And then when you guys engage with us, we'll have more data to offer you. Just a couple of remarks. We're an academic community, so we're always used to having the phrase "further study is needed" included in just about anything, especially if you have a grant and you need another grant. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I trained as a historian, and the transition section basically tells us how we got here. And I would want to review that transition section as part of the part of this process to make sure that we covered all the points. And there are probably a couple of things in the transition section that haven't been addressed. I think the topic of who can vote is in there. Some other things that should be studied or should have been studied that weren't done. So yeah, don't want to just simply throw it out. We want to take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. Meg?
My questions were very much along the lines of Andy and Bernie, so I won't repeat that. A couple of other things. When someone can start working with us in late March, will it be you two, Anthony and Pat, or will we be meeting two different people? Or
It will probably be us. I know Pat is eager to work with you, and I'll probably be involved in some way
Okay.
as well.
It's just, and I'll appreciate being able to be in touch. We don't have to always be in these meetings. We can send you a text and you can answer it and we can read it out loud. So but I think that's, this is really minor and I don't want to embarrass you, but it's, we pronounce our town Amherst without the H. And there's a joke, t-shirts, Amherst where only the H is silent. So it doesn't matter. We're used to it, but you might.
Well, I'll remember it. I'll remember
It's
that.
just a little,
Anthony, you've got that, you've got the 413 cred going for you. So you
yeah.
can maintain that,
Well, people live here for years and years and still say Amherst.
Yep.
So it's kind of, I don't know. It's just a funny, it doesn't matter that much. I don't want to embarrass you, but it's just so you'll know. 99% of the people who live here pronounce it that way. Maybe
And so
90.
none of us in this room are the H.
Who are silent. Yeah.
Anyway,
But thank you for being willing to
thank
work
you.
with us when you're so busy.
If
And I
I,
think just as
I'm
we
sorry.
have to really, we need to get this thing going. So you might sense a little bit of
Urgency.
eagerness, urgency.
Yeah.
And
Pat.
Pat had a,
one thing that you said just made me want to point out that what we frequently do is have a meeting in between your meetings, what we would call a planning meeting. And it's usually with the chair and sometimes with one or two other members, not consisting of a quorum, but just to plan out what's going to happen at the next meeting and
Great.
answer questions. So we make ourselves very available in between the meetings. And we really pride ourselves on that because we want to know what's going to happen in between and we want to get feedback on how you think the meeting went, what topics you're interested in coming up down the line so that we have a little, advance notice of, in 2 or 3 weeks, we want to talk about this and we can start getting ready to have you prepared to talk about what you want to talk about. So you won't just see us in these full meetings.
great.
Generally, we'll meet with the chair and sometimes there's another member or two who are involved in the planning in a smaller planning group.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. That's really helpful.
Excellent. It is very helpful. Okay, so any further questions for the Collins Center before we can let these wonderful folks go? Andy?
You're on
And you-
mute, Andy.
Thank you. I think, are you quasi-public or you're a mass agency of some sort? But that makes it easier for us to contract with you. Is that correct? And how do we go about doing that?
Correct. You don't have to do the whole procurement process. I'm always
Good.
forgetting the citation 30B or but whatever it is, you don't have to do the procurement process. We just send the proposal, the community agrees to it, and then we can sign a contract because we're a sub entity of UMass Boston.
Excellent. Would you, I was just wondering, so would we vote to request a proposal and then you guys would send us a proposal and we would send the cost along to that for the supplemental budget request to the manager?
I don't think you need to vote to request the proposal.
Okay,
I'll work on it. I'll send it over to you through the chair, and then
excellent. Thank
I
you.
don't know what your structure is, but maybe you want to vote that the committee wants to move forward with the engagement, then you'll
Excellent.
request the appropriate
So at
budget.
a future meeting, we will vote if we want to move forward with the engagement, and I'll also just speak to agenda point 6, which is the budget update. In that we would then send the cost associated with that proposal to the town manager. I would as our part of our supplemental budget request. So folks understand that update. Andy,
Oh, I'm sorry. I just left my
Nope.
hand.
any other questions for the Collins Center at this point? Seeing none, thank you both, Pat and Anthony. That was a wonderful presentation, and I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but at least me personally, I really look forward to working with you, and I think this will be a really productive relationship, as I know you've done work with Amherst in the past.
Thank you for having us. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you all. So that moves us
Good.
forward through agenda point 6 and 7. So now we're on agenda point 8, which is obviously we will need a extension for our committee's work, as we told the Collins Center, and the goal tonight is to decide when we want to submit that by. So any members who want to and myself can work on drafting that request to the town council. Meg?
I just was curious, didn't you say Raphael had joined?
No, I had said that Marcus had joined.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
earlier.
good.
Raphael has not joined us. And Eric
Got
already
it.
told me she's not going to
Yeah.
be here today. Yep. So when do we feel like is a reasonable time to, and if anybody who wants to work on drafting an extension request to our town council?
I can work on that. I mean, we have through till April, right?
Yep.
Technically, so it's not like we need to do it next week.
No.
Yeah, I can work on that. I'm assuming it's just a hey.
Sort of,
give us
yeah.
more time.
Basically,
Yeah.
a formalized and a date that we would like,
Mhm.
to extend it to, and to put
Mhm.
that extension request in a short rationale, on the topic. If we could
Yeah.
get that done maybe by March 1st, that I think that would be excellent.
Sure. What sort of date are we thinking about? Like, are we
That-
looking for like a? Oh, God! I see Andy's got his hand up.
That depends on when we'd like to submit the final report, which is the next agenda item. So these will sort of match.
Maybe maybe
Was my
can't put the
idea.
cart before the horse. Yeah.
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 Andy and Meg, do you still have your hand up?
Oh, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, Andy, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm remembering that the finance person said that there's a challenge of moving from year to year, from
Yeah.
fiscal year to fiscal year. I don't know.
It won't be if we have a contract.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
can have the contract go over.
I think the
Yeah.
challenge would be if we have some discretionary funds, like to host a meeting or do a mailing,
We need to know what year it's in.
and what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how you're doing it. The contract, if a contract's signed with the Collins Center, it becomes a continuing appropriation. We can keep, the money will just roll forward.
Okay, so then
Thank
we
you,
don't have
Bernie.
to worry about, making it June 30th. It could be, I mean,
I would
I would
be.
love to not have this thing be done by, I'd like to not be doing this forever, but I mean, maybe we say September 1st or something and
I
try
was
to
thinking a
get.
bit longer than that. I was thinking 6 months.
I was thinking
But-
longer than that as well. I was thinking we'd ask for an extension into like almost a year, maybe like February or March of next year.
No, not if I'm on this committee.
Yeah, I'd love to have a little bit more.
I think it's
urgency than
I
that.
think a 6-month extension taking us, because the summertime's gonna be difficult if we're gonna do
Yeah.
meetings,
Yeah.
because
Right.
the town goes away. So we want to leave ourselves some time in the fall to pull things together. So if we tell them that we'd have the contract done by the end of, the report done by the end of October, how many months is that? Sure, if that's 6 months, 6 months sounds sounds good.
more than 6 months from now, but
More than
yeah.
6 months.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not from now though, right? It's from the
It's
the
from
end of the last
April
you know,
1st,
thing.
yeah.
Right.
So,
Okay.
it's 6
One-
months from then.
March,
It would
April, May.
November
One
1st.
factor is that it took
Yeah.
them months to appoint us.
Right.
So the end of October would be 6 months from the end of April.
yeah,
is where we are.
I'm honestly kind of tempted to say 9.
I would like longer as well. I would be in support of longer, at least till the end of the year, if not
Because
February. or
if
March.
we get it done, but I
Wow.
mean, Bernie, if we get it done sooner, that's great. I'm just
It's awesome if we
concerned
get
that-
it done sooner, but we
Yeah.
want to allow us to have
Right.
that flexibility if we need it, and if we
If
don't,
we
that's
need
good.
it, I would rather have a tight deadline, and if we need to extend it again, go and get an
I-
It's going
extension.
again. Okay.
I
Yeah,
agree.
okay.
We need to put a pin in this and say this fire no further. And if we get to that point and we've got some amazing stuff that we need more time to cover, we can say to the council, we have some amazing stuff and we need more time to cover. But just
I'm-
stretching it out and stretching it out, it's not happy.
It gives us a false sense of security. Yeah.
I'm just going to remind people, try to raise hands. I know this was a little bit of a
I'm
back and
sorry.
forth discussion. That's okay. But if folks can raise hands, that's great. I'm also just going to jump in and try to bring this to somewhat of a close, given that it's getting close to 8 o'clock, and suggest that I'll split sort of the difference, and I'll make the motion for January 30th, 2026, if I have a second on that. You want to go a little sooner, Marcus?
Yeah, I think I am sorry, I'm
December 30th,
December-
2025.
I'd say November. Can we do November?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd do November 30th. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Well, actually, the
vote-
week before, whatever before Thanksgiving.
I agree. As Bernie said, we can always ask for another extension.
Yeah.
I didn't raise my hand,
Because
sorry.
I was thinking like
Mhm.
you know, to Bernie's point, right? Everybody leaves in the summer, so that gives us the fall semester effectively, and I think that like end of October is just a slight tad on the short side of that. So
Okay.
the week, the week before Thanksgiving in November, I think might give us enough, but not too much. And I don't know
The
when.
Collins Center is going to start working with us in late March.
Right.
So,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that already puts it out a little bit further that we should consider that. And I know the outreach subcommittee hasn't been moving all that fast on a proposal for a survey. So
Yeah.
that's just
Oh,
my
that's-
line of thought. But Andy, go ahead. Or sorry, did Meg, you had your hand up earlier?
Well, I was gonna respond to what you just said, but I'll wait.
Okay.
I'll put
Yeah.
my hand up.
Go
now.
ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Damn it.
we want to spend some time interviewing people who are or have been in the system. We want to talk to employees and other elected members, and I would think we could do all of that in a couple of months. And then we want to sort of look at that and I don't know if it's I would think that we would get some initial things for people to react to, and then we develop that into a survey. So if we were doing that over March and April, and then we could survey people in May before people leave town,
Oh, yeah.
and have some meetings,
Mhm.
and maybe we
Meetings in
do look,
April.
and then maybe we do some work ourselves over the summer, or and then by the fall we should be able to be getting down to some nitty gritty.
Okay.
So I think if we chunk it out, there's no more than a month or two on each of these sort of big pieces.
Mhm.
So I'd love to see a little bit of urgency.
And
Yeah,
we
so
do
maybe-
have three,
yeah,
we do
that's
have
okay.
3 reports. I'll just remind folks. I know
Right.
it's not just one report, so factor that into the process.
True.
Meg, go ahead.
Well, my comment is gonna get into my comment that I wanted to make at the end, but I think we need to get going. And I don't know why we can't start deploying Bernie's outline of counselors to meet with. We had a long discussion about that. And our subcommittee wasn't able to meet because Athena wasn't well and the meeting didn't get scheduled or something, but that was Erica and Raphael. They're neither of them here anyway, but I have another comment to make, but it's not, it's in my 48 hours before. Is this okay if I just make it now? It's related to
I
this.
do want to stick to the agenda as best we can. So let's settle this motion and then I'll move through the rest of the stuff.
Okay, thank you. Good idea.
No problem. So I'm hearing what folks are saying. Were we saying December 1st, maybe? Would that be acceptable?
Sorry,
Second, Meg?
I think maybe we need, yeah, to Andy and Bernie's point, maybe we need to, need to light a fire under one's behind, and let's go
Yeah.
with the 30th of October, so that
Okay.
we've got some urgency, because I am a huge procrastinator.
Do you want to
And
make that motion, Marcus?
Yes, I'll make the motion. I
Okay.
think, our motion that we ask for an extension through till October 30th of 2025 to the town council.
Okay.
Second.
And then would you also like to combine anything about the 3 reports? Because that would also mean that our final report would have to be submitted by that date, and we should think out about the other 2 as well.
Yeah, let's wait for that. Let's talk
Okay.
about that, because let's talk about that another time. I think let's
Okay.
just do the date to start with, and then we can plan around it, because I think for other people's points we need, so I think I heard Bernie as a second. Sorry.
Mhm.
Second, Bernie?
Yes.
Okay.
Question can we,
Andy?
in discussion, I mean, the last day of October is actually the 31st, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
crap.
Halloween. Woohoo.
30
Halloween.
days have September. Yeah, I should have
Yes.
been running through that thing.
Trick-
I'm looking at it. I'm
trick or
looking at it
treat.
at my screen right now. Okay. I will amend
Okay.
friendly amendment to the motion, the 31st.
Right,
Okay.
that's fine.
Bernie, that's fine. I'll start with you, Meg.
Friday, so
Friday's good.
Friday's good. Okay. Meg, are you voting?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
just
no?
surprised you all don't know when Halloween is. Yes.
Meg, are you voting yes, no on this?
Yes.
motion? Yes. Okay. Andy,
Yes.
Bernie,
yes.
Marcus.
Yes.
Okay. I'm abstaining. I think I'll abstain. So that is 4 in favor, 1 abstention. Motion passes. All right, and then we'll go to the dates for the 3 reports. Obviously, the final report will have to be submitted by the 31st. Do we want to discuss the 2 former reports, or would we like to table that to the next meeting, given the hour?
I
Okay,
think
well-
we table it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to defer it. I was
That's
counting on
appropriate.
hitting a hard stop at 8 o'clock.
Got it. I'm not seeing any public outreach event that I think is appropriate to table, just because we don't have the outreach subcommittee except Meg.
wait.
And
yeah.
you gave an update on the survey earlier, Meg, so I'm going to move on to future agenda planning. Is there any?
Wait, what about things you didn't think of 48 hours
Yep,
before?
that's next. That's after
Okay.
future agenda planning. Future agenda planning. Any comments for that? No. Okay. Oh, Andy, go ahead.
I think we had talked about having KP Law come and give us a summary of the various ways,
Okay.
a specific summary of how do you change a charter, whether it's the council can vote, whether it's the various flavors.
Got it. Any other future agenda planning suggestions for me? Nope.
My
Meg,
comment will
Yep.
be one.
okay, 48 hours in
before.
advance before we adjourn. Go right ahead, Meg.
I'll try to make this really, really quick.
No problem.
Need 2 things. You mentioned that the subcommittee isn't here to give a report on the survey, but at our last meeting, we said we were going to ask the Collins Center for advice on the survey. So that needs to be rethought, and I'll accept taking that back to our committee
Thank you.
to make a suggestion, because I think if we don't even start thinking about the survey until
Exactly.
late March,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. But the point I mean, I don't want to express too much anxiety, but
Please reference them to our vote. That will help.
you know,
them.
we're all
Okay.
spending quite a lot of time doing this, and if we need to make some progress, so many people
Right.
are coming up and saying, what's happening?
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
I want to suggest that the survey, I think, had a lot of problems. And it was, in my opinion, too broad. And I think it would be really, I'll cut to the chase, helpful if someone or group, and maybe our committee, I mean, I'm thinking, never mind, would have a sheet that describes some of what was said tonight, what can be changed in what different ways. I think Andy and Brian Harvey did a good start in an article they wrote in the current that could be expanded, but I think it would be helpful whatever survey we send out, it be accompanied by a short, tight, well-written example of what can be changed in what way.
Okay.
The 3 methods. We've had 2 long conversations that I thought were a little frustrating about the law and with concerns Dan had, and I thought we reached consensus. Obviously, I haven't spoken with him, but I think it's time to convert that into something that we can show the public. This is, you know, if you want to change this, here's how it happens. If you want to change that, here's how it happens. So that it starts to prime the wheels of people thinking. Because I think if you just say, what do you like about town government? A lot of people don't have a clue. And the low number of people who vote in referendum questions is an example. In our district, we don't have competitive elections for the council. And we used to have competitive elections for town meeting. We need to help them understand how our government works.
Right.
And not just ask them, how do you think it works? They're just
Andy?
going to say, I don't know. So I'm offering our subcommittee to write that, even though 2/3 of us aren't here.
Okay. Yeah, I would recommend we can put it on the next agenda for the outreach subcommittee to bring back a survey proposal.
Well, this
You
is
all
an
should-
addition to the survey. It's a
Right.
statement of what's possible.
You all should take that up to the subcommittee. I would recommend a priority focus on the survey and then work with the statement, just because a focus on the survey will really help get us going given the timeline we adopted.
So that's a
I would-
change. Does everybody else want to wait? That was a change from what we said at the last meeting. Does
I would
everybody agree
recommend
with that
that
we
you
should
take
work on
this-
it?
Take the survey back with the vote that we all just took and say, we need to get working on this now, and start working on it with something you can bring back to the next meeting, and then move along after that point with the other thing you were mentioning. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like this is that we can get started, but I think we should get started by doing the interviews with
Yes.
elected officials. I
Yeah,
think
I
that
agree.
will, that
Absolutely.
will give us a sense of momentum.
Yes.
We're
Yeah.
talking to people who are
Yes.
working with the charter and in the charter, and we can start to build some themes that are coming out of that.
Yeah.
And I
I
don't
agree.
think we need to
I
worry
agree.
about the survey quite yet. I think we
Yeah.
can build that based on what we're hearing from them, and at the same time, the Collins Center will come on at a time when we can bring what we can
Okay.
glean from those interviews, and we can get the support of the Collins Center, and then we can have a survey in like May or something, or
So,
April,
so
whatever. I mean,
for the next meeting, I will bring back a revised
Thank you.
contact list for
Awesome.
up on, and I will send around again the questions that I'd framed and some others that people might want to.
Considering
Okay,
what
I ended
we-
up with a list of like 25 questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
considering what we discussed in the last
Down to
meeting
5.
for the contact list.
So,
Yeah.
so I'll be happy to do that for the next in advance of the next meeting, so people will have the opportunity to look at it and think about it.
and hopefully
Awesome.
we can get input, feedback from the Collins Center on those questions as well before we go out and do those interviews.
Yeah.
But if they can allow that to happen.
Meg, you
I
raised
just-
your hand, but now
yeah,
I'm looking at
I've just lost my picture, but
documents.
do you agree with us writing a 1-page summary of can be changed, how different things are changed?
I don't see a problem with it necessarily. I don't think it should be the top priority. That's just my take. I would say that this is topics not anticipated. It's becoming more of a discussion than a topic, which means I will definitely put it on agenda as an agenda item for the next meeting. But
Okay, great.
I just wanted to give us a little bit of what allowed the public to expect at the meeting. So if I don't see any other comments or questions, I'm going to move to adjourn.
Second.
Great.
Second,
Second. Okay. And Meg,
Yes.
Bernie,
Yep. it's-
Marcus,
yes.
Andy,
Yes.
myself, I'm an I. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, bye.